All right, I've started the recording. This way, if I'm still dealing with a cold I caught in Duluth, so if I have to cough, I can at least mute it on my side, and then the computer in the other room hopefully won't pick up all my coughing. But welcome everybody. I'm very excited. Oh, Jeremiah is showing us his goats.
These are my therapists, by the way.
How many goats do we have there? We should have put this on the agenda. Everybody could have shown their goats.
Oh, come on. I got only 5 in here, 2 in the boat. I got 2 babies in the house, but 5 adults out here.
Wow.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry for the distraction.
That's cool. It's been a long time since I've milked goats.
I just did. That's how I feed the babies in the house.
It's not since high school. I think the last time I helped a friend milk their goats. I milked cows when I grew up. All right, so our goal for tonight is to talk about statistics, what kind of scouting data we gather, and how I suppose how we evaluate that data, how teams use their scouting data to make a pick list, and then a topic that I'm really excited about, and I hope we get to spend a fair bit of time on it, is how we can make scouting fun. So KnightKrawler created a game this year, sort of off the seat of our pants, off the cuff type thing, where we created a game and we got really good feedback on it. So we'll share a little bit more about how that does. And I heard someone last week talk about scouting bingo. So I'm curious to know how their team uses a bingo game for their scouting. So does anybody want to start off by sharing, their team's overall scouting strategy and what kind of data they collect and how they use it?
I can give a little presentation on what we do. It's not something we created, but it's something that we've utilized for the last couple of years. I put it in the chat. Maybe I'll put it in again for those that just joined. Spires Scouting, if you guys have heard of that. And it's a web-based deal, and I'll share my screen here maybe. So it has a login page, and when you get logged in, you can, depending on if you're scouting or if you're in the pit, you select Scout or Dashboard, and then it has a pit scouting thing as well, and then a pick list option. And then, so if you go to the dashboard, so we have students in the stands with tablets doing the scouting, and I can't pull up what the tablets look like, but the data that they get, it has all these tabs here, and we can scroll through with the drive team and looked at all the stuff that all the teams have done, and it actually gives you like a predicted match score at the end. This is just a random match from the Great Northern Regional. It shows team trends, like if they're increasing or decreasing. It's all broken down by different game pieces. It shows averages for any team that you want to put in. You can put in different teams up here if you want to do a simulated match. It shows match path, which is kind of interesting. So the robots are tracked by the scouters as they go back and forth across the field, and you can drag the time over to see how their path differs as the time, and you can pick the match and the team to check that. It has a spot for scouters' notes that they can put in as well. And then it has some scouter stats, and it pulls from the Blue Alliance to kind of see how the scouters are doing and how accurate they are a little bit. And then part of the game of this, which makes it more entertaining for our scouters, is they predict the match score prior to the match, and they get ranked on that by the points that they earned. And also, and I'm not very good at this side of it, but you can look up and see how accurate each scouter was by name. And then we usually do some gift cards for the ones that were paying the best attention and getting the best data for us. But prior to every match, we went through the alliance matchup and a few other things in the pits with the drive team and developed our strategy from there, which is crucial for some success. So Fire's scouting, free to use and pretty dynamic. Lots of data there.
How does it know how accurate your scouts are?
Well, it pulls some, and this is a little bit above and beyond me. I'm not the scouting mentor, and she could probably address it better. But it does pull some data from the Blue Alliance on some things, and I'm not exactly sure what. But then it'll reference what the student thought it was as opposed to what the Blue Alliance said it was, and it'll give them a accuracy percentage on some of the things. So.
Because I thought that Blue Alliance only tracked things per alliance, so
right, that might be kind of a portion of how, if a student says the alliance scored X number on Y node, and the Blue Alliance says something differently, that's going to affect their accuracy.
So do your scouts follow a single robot, or do they scout the whole match?
They follow three. Every scouter has their own robot. Yep. And all our tablets are like, we have a blue 3 tablet and a red 2 tablet and a blue 1 tablet, and that's the robot that they watch the entire competition. They always watch blue 1 or whatever it might be. But this is our second year of using it, and it's been helpful. I'll show you the pick list. Sorry, I'll just dive into that real quick here. The pick list assistant. So if I select that tab, you can, I gotta pick my regional. And then, so autonomous, you can say all these things and then give it a weighted score. We'll just put in some random stuff here. Teleoperated. And if you want whatever else you want to do, load the pick list. Let's see if it's going to work for me. There it is. So it has all the teams that whatever randomness I put in there, it gives me a green light on if they meet my criteria, and it ranks them down accordingly. So you can see able to engage the charge station is something I obviously click there, and it gives me their stats on all of those things. So we'll use that when we go through our final selection if we're in the picking possibility, So, but pretty powerful. Really like it. We have a couple phones that Bluetooth tether to our tablets, a couple just burner phones kind of deal. So all the data is real time, so you don't need to go somewhere and upload it to the main thing. It just uploads automatically. So we can see last match data for the next match if we need to. It happens pretty quickly. Anything else anybody wants to see on there? I can maybe run them through.
So are you using Bluetooth to share the internet connection, or does the Bluetooth sync the data to the phone and then the phone uploads it?
Correct. Yep.
This is the second one?
Yep.
Have you had many issues with signal in the venues that you're at?
No, we haven't. It just runs on, just the 4G with our phones, and that signal is usually pretty good. Some venues actually have open Wi-Fi that you can get on, but no, we haven't really run into any issues with that so far. We've had a couple minor crashes, and I don't know what to attribute that to, but yeah, it hasn't really come up as a major problem.
Gio asked the question in the chat: How useful do you find the path tracking?
Last year it was kind of, I don't know. We're not like a defensive heavy team, and that's not what we really focus on. If you were, it'd be pretty useful to see where they're going, so you can do some zone type stuff. This year it could be kind of useful in the higher levels, I think. Last year it was nice to know where people shot from. This year it's nice to know where people pick up from. If they always pick up from the side human player station, it'll show you that. And that's whether they're your alliance member or against you. It's nice to be able to see where they're moving about the field, so you can kind of coordinate, your strategy. There's also heat maps on there, and I'm not sure what the heat map is going to show us. If it loads up here. But basically the scouters say where they pick up and where they place. It's not liking that one. Yep. Anyway. So that's what we've been doing. We used to do paper pencil scouting stuff, and this has been drastic. Also, our drive team has some tablets that has access to this data, and just a little simulated field on there that they can draw on to create paths and stuff. So that's helpful too, especially when you're okay. Who wants to do autonomous, and what are you going to do? And you have an alliance member that says, "Oh, we need to do the balance," and one of our drivers can quickly pull up and be like, "Well, you've never done that before, so maybe somebody else should," or whatever the case might be.
Yeah, having real-time statistics, I can see a lot of value in that, especially as you're doing strategy planning for the next qualifications match. 3138. Who knows who 3138 is off the top of their head? They created this service app.
They're out of Ohio.
Blue Alliance says Innovators Robotics. Interesting. The message that came up when you were doing this stuff is Tableau. Tableau is a really expensive statistics package. I wonder if they get it for free because they're a school, or the school has a license, or nonprofit.
I believe the gentleman that runs it, and I don't know him very well. His name's Rob, and I think I don't see him as being a teacher. I think he's probably in a software development kind of career, and he's part of a team, and he's been doing this for a while. But super great to work with. I mean, we've had questions as we were first starting to use it. Our scouting mentor would email him, he'd respond. He'd set up test matches so our kids could practice on it. Really, really great guy to work with, and put out a pretty good product, I think.
Yeah. Does anybody else want to share anything about their scouting, their process, tools they use?
I can.
Okay.
So we use FRC Crawler, which is a scouting app that we created ourselves. I'll send you the page on our website about it. it runs on tablets. There's not a good way to show you by screen sharing, but basically, it seems to be able to do less than Fires can, but it doesn't need to be online, because we get an event into our master tablet, and then we'll go and we'll set up, for each year we have to manually set up what metrics we're going to use. Then every time we sync a slave tablet to it, then every time we sync a slave tablet to it, it gets the questions for that year. And then we have 6 scouts watching the match, and they put their data in, plus a comment to explain what we couldn't see. And then we'll go through that in order to determine who we want to look for on Saturday in the last couple qualification matches, what to look at. We'll also usually have a couple people doing paper and pencil scouting just for either entertainment or to get extra data. And then our tablets don't sync live. We have to sync them manually and then export the data from the master tablet as a CSV. But then we can just analyze it as a spreadsheet. But we have to do everything with the spreadsheet manually. I don't know.
Yeah, and the FRC crawler app can be used for pit scouting. You would just make the metrics. I don't know if we've done that a lot in the past. At Northern Lights, we had students doing paper and pencil scouting for that. And then we kind of manually compiled that physical data into a different spreadsheet, but we could have also used the app for that if we had tablets for that or gave students phones. So that's also an option if you pursue the KnightKrawler app. Ian, did you have scouting stuff you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, so I guess I can talk a little bit about the back end for the scouting that 3926, No Mythic, Ultraviolet, and 2450. So we're all kind of doing a scouting alliance between our events this year. I'm trying to figure out what type of screen I should be sharing. I'll just share my entire screen. Share. So if you can see my screen, it basically just uses a Google Forms that's linked to a sheet, so that part's pretty low tech. The only, I guess, interesting thing is kind of this team lookup that we have. So basically you can type in a team. Right now it's hooked up for Duluth, but it doesn't have any of the scouting data because it's actually the North Star one. So like you can put in a team number, and so it has all the scouting data in here that's not quite there because it's been cleared. But then also can pull the rank from Blue Lions. And then the one thing that's been added that I found really cool, so there's this website called Statbotics that uses basically a formula of systems of equations to figure out how much points each team is expected to add per match. So that is added in Nope. It is added in here. So kind of you can pull that from the StatBotics API of how many points each team is expected to get. For example, 39-26 is expected to contribute 29 points per match. So what it can then do is it turns that into match predictions that have, I believe, an 80% accuracy. So then we have a match prediction. So this is the first final match if it decides to load. And it might not decide to load because I might not have actually run this. And I didn't, so it uses app scripts to pull from the API. That'll populate maybe if it wants to. So if that populates, and it looks like it's having trouble connecting right now, then seems that the StatBox API does not want to work right now. But if it does, it usually gives basically the. Oh, it says it did it now. Maybe if it. It did not populate itself. That's odd. But basically it'll just say I think it'll say this match, one team has a 50% chance of winning or an 80% chance of winning or whatever, and then it will, that's helpful going into a match knowing, should we be going for just ranking points or trying to get a win?
Ian, is this a tool that your team or the collaboration of the three teams put together themselves?
So No Mythic made most of the scouting backend, and then over spring break, I implemented the StatBotics predictions into it. Although StatBotics as a whole today has been acting really goofy, not just with their API. So I think on Chief Delphi they said something was maybe going on with that. I'm not sure. I'd have to check in, but I know when I was trying to access it earlier today, it said it was down for me. So,
Caleb asked in the chat if you know if EPA is different than the OPR.
Yeah, so EPA is slightly different from OPR. It's a combination between both OPR and ELO, but also different. There's documentation on StatBox on how they found it. I'll send that link in the chat. The math is a little different for EPA versus OPR. Oh, well, Jesse already posted it, but EPA is marginally more accurate, and it can be related into a certain, I guess OPR can too, but it also tracks performance from year to year. And so basically you have a raw EPA value, which is similar to ELO, where, baseline's 1500 for an average team, and it goes up or down. And so it then converts that into a number that is for a given season, which can be nice. Yeah.
Does anybody else have a scouting tracking app or system that they want to talk about and share? How do teams approach the pick list on the field? It can be hard to make a pick list, and if anyone has any thoughts on how they make their pick list, and Jesse already shared some of how the app makes the pick list, but then how do you, for those of you who have been on the field, how do you collaborate with your alliance partner to make that a second pick? how do you deal with those two separate lists? How do you keep your lists up to date? I know that that seems to be a challenge of keeping track of who's been picked. Anybody have any advice there?
Well, oh, you can go, Jesse.
No, go ahead.
Okay. As like an team representative, I always make sure that I try to make sure that we go down with more teams than we think we need. Because usually when students are having a strategy discussion, you kind of have to push them to be like, there are going to be more teams taken than you think. And so finding kind of, if you're an alliance captain, finding the like mid-range teams and really having distinction between those is important. And then as far as I approach with collaborating with other alliances, generally it's about figuring out what your alliance strategy is. And so from there, kind of, you look at both teams' data and say, okay, what are the robots that we both have? Strong opinions on either one and why. And it's kind of like a negotiation and just figuring out, by the time that, it either winds around to you and it's your turn, what's left and what still meets your requirements, and then go from there.
Part of the thing that we do too that helps speed it up is we first figure out what we absolutely can't have in an alliance member, so when we're making the pick list, rather than having an extended discussion about things that we're not going to pick anyhow, we can just say, do they fall into X category where we're even considering them, or do they not?
Kelly, can you share an example of, for this year's game, some of the things that are maybe red flags that make you worried about selecting a team as an alliance partner?
Yeah, like if
or the
robot
things that you think are really critical for this particular game?
Yeah, like if robot is super tippy, or they manage to tip, especially when not falling off the charge station, but even when they do fall off the charge station, and just tippiness was the main thing that we were looking for. The other thing that we were trying to avoid was, although less critically, was roller drive trains, like Mechanum or H drive, just because defense.
Jesse, did you have something you were going to share about pick lists?
Well, this year our boys team was an alliance captain in Grand Forks, and we're not really too used to that. So I think it might have been his second time ever being up as an alliance captain. So a couple of the mentors were in the pits with a couple of students going through the fire stuff, and we were just live on the phone. I mean, it can be stressful. You're in front of thousands of people there. And the drive team may or may not be really up to date on what the scouting stats are. So we were going through it and then told them the team numbers that we were looking for, and we were just crossing them off in the pits with a couple students to make sure we weren't selecting anybody that was already picked by somebody else, and we just kind of went down our list. But yeah, I mean, as an adult, I wouldn't want to be up there in front of that many people and trying to make those kinds of decisions. That's gotta be pretty intense. So we try to take a little bit of that stress off the student by just giving them some numbers so they don't have to track everything themselves.
Does anyone track whether a robot became disabled or lost comms during the match? I feel like with this new double elimination, that's one of the things that becomes a more important stat, since it's it happens. I mean, we see it happen every playoff match where somebody loses comms for 30 seconds for a minute, and then they finally get up and running again. And in previous years, when you had to win 2 out of 3, that could happen once, or it could even happen twice, and you would have a chance to recover as long as it didn't happen in back-to-back matches. And this year, with losing 2 and you're out, I feel like that sort of dependability, reliability of somebody losing a chain or having a hose pop off or losing comms, I think that becomes a much more important statistic in scouting. Does anyone explicitly track that kind of thing, or do they think there's anything else that double elimination has changed in how they balance the importance of the things they track? Lexi and Caleb, is that even a statistic that's in our regular scouting of whether they were operating the entire match, or is that just something we put on our notes?
Traditionally, it hasn't been because it shows up in notebook scouting and in the comments. But I do point out it might not be a bad idea to just add like a slider to the list that just says broke to indicate something going wrong enough that the robot can't do what it's supposed to.
Yeah, it's hard to quantify that, but I suppose if you saw 2 or even 3 qualifications match where somebody was down for part of the match, I guess that would be an indicator. But it may also show up in the other statistics too, in terms of how much they scored, and may push them out in other ways if they had other kind of dependability issues. Does anybody have any other sort of general scouting stuff they want to do, or do we want to talk about games next?
I did have a quick question for other teams. So I know something that we measure on the app, it shows up as like a slider that says driver confidence. Are there ways that other teams kind of track that, or, or is it mostly just like your drive team observing other teams and saying, oh, they accelerate really fast and stop really fast, and then they're likely to tip over? Stuff like that. Not to pick on you, Ian.
Yeah, I saw Ian grimace when Lexi said tip over for stopping too fast. I think it was interesting. I think you could definitely tell in our regional Northern Lights, you could tell the teams that had a lot of driver practice. The Sabre Robotics, I know personally because they had been sharing their updates that they had been driving since, I think, week 3 of build season. And so I think that clearly showed how much driver practice they had. But I thought it was also interesting. It seemed like you could kind of tell the teams that had the more driver practice. It's an interesting concept to try to quantify that.
It's interesting that you said that too, because when I saw Sabre Robotics in Wilmer, that video, and I'm like, oh, heck no. This is not the first time driving this robot, because it was just smooth and it was just a robot, but still, it was just smooth turns. And then I was watching the Finger Lakes, because that's where I went to high school, in that area. So 639 is my robotic team from my high school. I was never a part of it, but they planted the initial seeds. So I kind of been watching the matches, and I'm like, man, they're having the same issue. I have to call down there sometime this week and find out what happened, because I'm like, their driver was driving just almost like my kids were driving, because it's like no practice time. You just start driving your first match, and that's like, oh, hopefully that button works, and that's kind of, and I saw quite a lot of those in Rochester this weekend, because I'm like, man, it's like the freeze time in your world, and everybody else is like, so like, oh, dang it. But it's quite interesting you brought that. I hope, that's something I'm looking into, seeing how we can do better in coming season.
Yeah, that would be a neat thing to implement, and I don't think Fires really has that thing, but just drive coaching for a couple years like I have. I mean, in the queue line, there's definitely students that are confident in their abilities and confident in the strategy that they want to employ. And there's students that are just along for the ride, that, you know, they're just happy to be there and like the music. So I don't know. Our two girls on our drive team are pretty outgoing, and they come in with some pretty good information. And so I think they portray some pretty good confidence in their abilities, and they're very realistic about what their own robot abilities are. So having students that are outgoing enough to be able to communicate is good.
I think tracking that driver practice and driver confidence it's an important data aspect, and whoever can do that very best, I will love to follow them too, because I think it's one of those things where it's like, for example, I live on a gravel road. When I first when I first started dating my wife, I drove on this road and I thought I was going to die going 20 miles an hour on a gravel road. And I go 45, 50 miles an hour on this road, and I don't even think about it. But it's just because you've done something so often that it becomes part of your DNA. You don't think about it, and that is in itself is the perfection of what I think it was Aristotle who said, master is simply what repeating the same thing over and over and getting more practice. And so being able to track that would be a really good indicator for teams to know going into a match, these other two drivers, how are they, what is their driving like? It helps also to build up your kids too. So, hey, how can we build our confidence so that somebody else out there can say, oh, I don't mind playing with that team, because you know what? They get their stuff. It's, getting to know yourself and getting to know other people, through data is an important aspect I'm learning in this game.
We have one scouter that kind of scouts outside of the actual scouting apps and everything in the paper. And what she does is she basically watches the interaction of the robots. She doesn't really pay attention to how they score, what they do. She pays attention to, do they get in each other's way? Do they play defense on their own alliance? Are they getting, are they blocking their team from scoring? Are they blocking them from picking up game pieces? Just kind of how they interact with their own alliance and with each other. So, and that's kind of key to how our alliance picks, are they going to prevent us from getting in and scoring? Or are they going to block us from being able to get onto the charging station? Or, so how are they going to play with us when we go into that match? So having her being able to do that has really helped our drive team going into matches and say, okay, we've noticed that, you can only come on to the charge station from this side. So that's, helped them that, okay, so we're all going to have to come in from this side at the same time, and to balance, or, you really struggle on this. So maybe in this match, only us two robots are going to balance and that. So having that one person that's not watching all of the other aspects of the game has really helped our drive team.
Gio had a good comment in the chat about asking how many hours of driving they've had as part of pit scouting. That's a neat idea too. I don't know if our team has considered that as a question, but I like that idea.
One thing I might be concerned about doing that is I know that teams have a tendency during pit scouting, especially wanting to make themselves look good. And I think that's, natural. If you're, trying to be picked, you want to, be the most, appeal, right? You want. So I know that one of our philosophies with pit scouting is we try to ask for data that is more, concrete in answer, like, are you a swerve bot or are you a tank bot? Or like, at what places do you score, rather than more abstract things that can be, exaggerated. And we try to look for those things during match play. Like, I know one of the things that we looked at in ours was we had a category just for general maneuverability. So that was kind of a bit of drive practice, but also how well the drivetrain, moved. Could it get out of defense? So it was like a very general, I think it was like rank it on a 1 to 5 scale, but it kind of was a very general thing that you could kind of tell, like, if it's a fast robot, but also, high in control robot, and it kind of like condensed it all into one question, which I don't know if arguably all of that should be condensed into one question, but when we're trying to make things easier on our scouters, that's what we did.
Ian, you just triggered something for me that I wonder if it would be helpful to ask teams, if you're doing swerve, are you robot-centric or field-centric swerve? So last year was our first year doing swerve, and our driver had been driving tank for a long time, and he preferred robot-centric driving. And when we were at Champs, we noticed that the teams that were field-centric swerve tended to be able to get away from the defense so much easier. And so we strongly encouraged we let them do their driver testing in whatever way they preferred, but strongly encouraged them to practice field-centric driving. And I think we're noticing a difference in terms of maneuverability, which is what you just asked. I had never even considered asking teams that were swerve-bot if they were robot-centric or field-centric, but that might be sort of a telling data point for some teams.
If you asked our driver that, he would say, depends on where I'm at on the field.
Ah, smart. Situation aware.
He actually has a button that he switches. While he's out on the field, he is field-oriented, and when he comes in to score, he's robot-oriented.
Oh, if our primary driver's on the call here, I think he's going to be asking for that. Good. That's a neat idea. Anybody else do anything like that? I know there have been years when we've had a button on the joystick that switched what was the front and what was the back of the robot. Depending on which way you were driving, you could hold down a button and the front became the back, the back became the front. Which I think is a great strategy for tank drive. If you're doing tank drive, to be able to have the driver be able to, instead of having to switch their mind of left is right and right is left, to be able to just switch which way is the front of the robot when they're moving back and forth across the field. Ken, you had a question? Go ahead.
For other teams, what do you like most prioritize in a robot?
When you say most are you talking about for scouting? Like what makes the best alliance partner?
I just want to know how, like, what do you prioritize most in a robot when you're scouting? I'm curious.
I think, at least for what we were looking for, it depends a lot on the specific robot. Like, I know that for us, right, because we're a robot that only really does logo and, we can shoot whatever level with cubes, but for everything else, we're, majority a logo robot. So if we're in a position to be picking, right, we want to make sure we have good data on what high goal robots would there be that are good at cones that would be able to, complement us. So there's definitely one of the main things I think is that it is a lot about what robots work well specifically with your own robot. So in what areas, I try to think of it as like in what areas are the gaps filled. So like, for example, with our robot being a tank robot, we might want to have, a swerve robot that's able to get around defense easier if, we're in a position of picking. And so I guess, at least for me, it's usually tending to think about what gaps does our robot have or what gaps does our alliance have and how to fill them.
Yeah, thanks. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, just to echo that. That's if we are in the position of picking, find out what our weaknesses are, and we should know that. and who's going to best complement you, and what strategy you want to employ. So if you need a defensive robot on your pick list, then you got to prioritize that a little bit. Or if you need another offensive scorer, then you got to prioritize that. So yeah, it's really based on your robot and the strategy that you think is going to be the most successful.
Yeah, thanks for answering my question.
Does anybody else have any scouting type of things they want to do? Otherwise, I'm chomping at the bit to talk about games. I'm really excited about this topic. So I'll kick it off. I mentioned this last week on the call, but at Northern Lights, we sort of came up with a last-minute game. We announced the team the practice night, so they really only had one day to get their head around this concept. But we created a Google form, and we let our students and mentors try to pick the 24 teams that would make the playoffs. And personally, we've gotten some really good feedback on it, but personally, I feel like it really got our students to go spend time in the pit and talk to teams. And it also, we always struggle, and I don't know, I'm sure other teams have the same issue, but we struggle with a lot of new students who are new to the team and they don't really get how competitions go. And at their first competitions, we have a lot of students on their phones while matches are happening. And I feel like this has sort of become one way that we are strongly encouraging students to be watching matches instead of socializing or being on their phone. So the way that the competition worked is it was just simply a Google form. You just went through and you picked the top 24 teams. And the Google form, I set it up, and I wish I had set it up differently because it made it actually really hard at the end to figure out which 24 or to go through and see who had picked the most teams. I had to write some really hard Google Sheets macros to be able to get it to count them all up because I just did them as checkboxes. But we had 4 students who got 20 out of the 24 rights, and we had 3 mentors who got 19 out of 24 rights. So we had 4 students beat the mentors in their picks, and I think 20 out of 24 was actually a lot higher than I expected it to be. So we're excited about it. I think we're going to try to do it again, but it has sort of opened the door to what other things can we do to get kids to spend more time in the pits, ask great questions, really observe and pay attention to what robots are doing. And so I'm excited to hear if anyone else has any games that they're currently playing, or if anyone has an idea for a game that could be created. Some of it might need a lot of programming and access to the API, but some of it you could just maybe do in a Google Sheet. So does anyone else have anything that they do for fun? Ian does.
Well, I had spring break this past week, so I was incredibly bored. And I know last time you mentioned about there being interest in doing fantasy first. So I kind of thought about how I would set up fantasy first if I was to do it. And so I kind of made an entire system that would allow that to happen. So basically, the way I made it work was I wanted teams to be able to, or students to be able to make basically, teams of different amount of robots to make sure they're balanced. So you don't just choose, the top 5 teams and then win. Basically, there's an EPA limit. So that's using the stat box metric because I figured that was a decently accurate metric of, team skill in quotation marks. But so basically this is for Duluth. So if you made a team of KnightKrawler, Patriotics, 3926, Talon, and Databits, right, you'd be just under that limit. So that'd make it a valid entry. And so the way these are scored is basically by it's a modified version of district points. So in this spreadsheet, basically takes the ending rank, whether it was a captain or a second pick, its ending placement, and then how many points it got from its rank, how many points it got from the alliance it was on, how many points it got from how far it went. It's a little modified from the current version of district points, because I just said it was worth basically 5 points for every 2 ranks. So if you were in the top 6, you'd get 5. If you're in the top 4, you'd then go up to 15, then 20, then 25, then 30. Then it kind of got an overall total points from that using that system. And then it, so then it uses that to calculate a total score that people get. And then so there's also just a team creator that would be accessible to everyone, where you could just mess around and see what teams you'd be able to create. Like, you know, if you swap that out with like 3928, then it's like, oh, it's too high of an EPA. I can't submit that as a valid team. So I thought that might be a fun thing to do on like a Thursday before the matches start. And I don't know if I'll be able to convince anyone from my team to actually do it. That question remains to be seen.
So then would you submit this as a Google form then that would load up the spreadsheet?
Yeah, it would be a Google form that would link into the spreadsheet. If anyone's interested in doing it at North Star or 10,000 likes, let me know and I could actually run it. This was more of a side project because I was bored and already working with Google Sheets for the scouting backend.
I have a feeling that I can throw a dozen students on the KnightKrawler team at you for this thing. This sounds really, really cool. That's a really interesting idea that you would set up a point limit based on the EPA. I had never even considered that. And then the way that you're doing points, I think that's brilliant.
Yeah, because I think it is.
I want to do it too.
Hey, yeah.
I think it incentivizes, in my opinion, looking for the teams where you think that they made a lot of changes from their last regional, right, where their new EPA is going to be higher than what Statbotics currently grades them. So if you find a team that says their EPA is 10, and then, you know, you're talking to them, they're like, we didn't drive at all at our last regional, right? But now we're scoring, 20 points in drive practice, right? Then you might want to pick them because, right, it's only costing you 10 points, but at the same time, you're hopefully going to get more point value out of that.
I was just going to say that. Thank you for saying that. You know, what I like, for what you just said also, too, is one of the things about this program that I really, really like is kids like you. I was bored, and I created something very useful that everybody else can use. And that just, keep up the good work. I really, and with the statistics, I was just going to say that, too, because when we were in Superior, and we just had a rough weekend. We did. And then when we came to GNR, we changed our strategy to, okay, we're not going to even deploy our mechanism because this is not the time for it, and we're just going to focus on programming and just playing interference the whole time. So we're able to focus on auto balancing and also being able to utilize the charge station and just being a robot that's in the way. And I mean, we didn't go in the playoff, but we ranked 33, considering how we did in Superior. So when you look at the differences in that, if we're going to like a third, competition or something, if you look at it like, well, there's a difference in there and you want to know what that difference is, so yeah, nice job.